Hello, Lisbon. Good evening from Athens. Good evening to our old and new friends from the Quarantine Studies Network. Many thanks to the organizing committee for your efforts in order to save this conference. Please accept our congratulations. I am Costas Tsiamis from the Department of Microbiology from Athens University Medical School, and with my co-authors Chryssa, Hatzara, and Vrion, we will present you some highlights from this huge story of the Suez Canal, the sanitary history of the Suez Canal in this brief presentation. And as you know, Suez Canal is one of the most significant achievements in the human history. And as for the sanitary history, the case of Suez is an integral part of the European history. The European politics, colonialism, the economy, diplomacy, and of course the geostrategy. Let's see some aspects of this story. Just 6 years after the opening of the canal, due to financial collapse, Egypt was forced to sell its shares of the operating company to the British. In 1881, a wave of violence broke out in major cities of Egypt against the ruler Mohammed Tawfiq Pasha, the British and the French. The unstable political situation in Egypt, and Egypt was part of the Ottoman Empire, and the endangered safety of the Suez Canal forced the British to invade, and the country became a British protectorate. This dramatic event took place during the fifth pandemic of cholera. Unfortunately, despite the scientific meetings of the European delegations during 5 international conferences, differences were chaotic between the delegations on the quarantine procedures and the nature of cholera. According to the decisions of the sixth conference in Rome, the ships coming from India were free to enter in the canal if the medical inspection certified that the crew and the passengers were free of disease. Actually, it was an extremely risky approach based on the combination of the incubation period of cholera and the date of departure from India. During the next conference in Venice, European delegations agreed something very interesting and amazing, that the danger of cholera was greater by pilgrims than by the merchant ships. And above all, the deep feeling of the scientific supremacy of Europe led to the decision to establish two international sanitary councils in Egypt and Ottoman Empire. And we have another interesting fact in this case, that the members of the sanitary councils were the consuls of the European countries in Ottoman Empire and Egypt. The occupation by the British led to changes in the procedures of quarantine in Egypt in the Suez Canal zone. The region of Suez officially was a neutral zone, but officially the zone was under British protection. So it was easy for the British ships to avoid the quarantine measures and the sanitary regulations of the Egyptian government. But after the pressure of the European countries and the two boards in Egypt and Ottoman Empire, new strict quarantine measures were introduced by the Egyptian government. for the ships from India, and for the first time for the ships from the port of Aden in Yemen. The report of the British representative on the Ottoman International Board to the Secretary of State in London is indicative. If Britain did not begin to act like a civilized member of the community of nations, the two Middle Eastern boards would place all Indian ports under permanent quarantine. We can find a lot of interesting data in the American sources, the American public health reports. We found some of them. The reports are by the American delegates and the sanitary inspectors in Ottoman Empire and Egypt. And let's see some fragments from a report just to see the style of a public health report. The report, for example, 191. I call your attention to the fact that there has been one fatal case of bubonic plague on a steamer at Suez. The Russian sanitary representative has proposed to take some sanitary steps in order to prevent the spread of the evil in Turkey. The French sanitary representative communicated some extracts from the reports of the French consul in Jeddah. The inhabitants of Jeddah, as well as the pilgrims, are so much incited against the sanitary officials. It would be impossible to have the city of Jeddah isolated. The military forces could not resist the population. It's a typical report, health report, and with a dose of espionage. The fear of pilgrims is visible on the eve of the 20th century. Indicative is the report Cholera in Arabia by the British delegate to the Ottoman Board of Health. Those coming northwards will undergo a quarantine of 10 days at El Tor. They will then pass the Suez Canal in quarantine, that is to say, with guards on board and without communicating with the source. Few words about the period of Second World War and the problem of plague, because plague was another medical issue of great importance for Egypt. And during the Second World War, we must say that the flea index was extremely high. The flea index is a measure of fleas per host, per rodent. And this index is a predictor of a plague outbreak. So during Second World War, a project for the control of the rodents was introduced by the Epidemic section of the Ministry of Public Health of Egypt in order to protect the mainland against the spread of plague from the ports of the Suez Canal zone. The sanitary mission was well planned and no case of plague was reported in mainland from 41 to 45, but the situation in the canal zone was completely different in Suez, in Port Said. And in 42, the disease reappeared in Port Said, and in early 43, a severe epidemic was recorded in Suez and the British camps on the west bank of the canal. Until 45, more than 1,000 cases were reported in the region of Suez and Ismailia. After the end of the war, the newly arrived dichlorodiphenyl trichloroethane, the famous insecticide DDT, was used for the control of the fleas and the plague. And after the use of DDT, the disease disappeared from the canal. And I will finish this brief presentation with a very interesting case from the epidemiological point of view. It's about the cholera, as you can see from the images. It's about the cholera in Egypt during 1947. And according to the preliminary report of the Egyptian Ministry of Public Health, the outbreak was reported on September 22 of 47. And the epicenter was the Canal Zone. 5 months after the outbreak, more than 20,000 cases and over 12,000 deaths were recorded in the country. But 3 years later, a new report was presented by the Egyptian delegation in WHO, in the World Health Organization. According to the report, the origin of the epidemic was not Egypt, but the cholera outbreak in India and Pakistan in the last week of August of 47, as a result of the cross-immigration of millions of Muslims and Hindus between the two countries after their independence from British on 15 August 47. Patient zero in Egypt was a worker in a British military camp of the Canal Zone. The committee found evidence that cases of cholera had occurred in Canal Zones 11 days before the first case, as early as 11 September of 47. And according to the new report, British troops began their withdrawal from India on 15 August and utilized the Suez Canal zone as a quarantine station for the troops on their way to the United Kingdom. The airports in the Suez Canal zone used by the British troops received aircrafts directly from outside Egypt and were not subject to the quarantine supervision of the local health authorities. As we understand, the sanitary defense of the canal zone had been traded not by the sea but by the air. And a few words about the future of the Suez Canal. In the 21st century, health security in Suez Canal remains a priority, while strict adherence to the international health regulations and guidelines of the World Health Organization and epidemiological monitoring constitute key elements in safeguarding health, the health of Egypt, the international health, safeguarding the world trade. And as we understand the next chapter of the modern sanitary history of the Suez Canal would be the new challenge of our new, let's say, friend, our new virus, SARS-CoV-2. And this is the website of the Suez Canal Authority for further data, navigation rules, other guidelines, interesting data and information. And as a conclusion from our presentation, I think that we have three main points. First, the European influence and involvement in the sanitary planning of the Middle East. Second, the British indifference for the quarantine measures, we suppose in the frame of the global economic and trade competition during the 19th century. And the third, and I think the most important and most dangerous, that the public health was a game or a part in a huge geopolitical game in Middle East. Thank you very much for your attention.